श्रियद्वैतगदाधार शिवासति गौरभक्तवृन्द श्रीकृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधर श्रीवासदि गौर भक्तवृंद।
हरे कृष्ण प्रभु जी, दंडवत प्रणाम्स।
Hare Krishna, Hare
Krishna Raj. Hare Krishna devotees, Dandat pranams to all. Today we are very first. We welcome all of you for the today's morning program Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya. And today we are very fortunate to have His Grace Sri Bhagavat Prabhu. And Prabhu will enlighten us on Srimad Bhagavatam, 4th Canto, 24th chapter, verses 7 to 10. Over to you, Prabhuji. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji. First of all, thank you all for giving me this opportunity to read these verses from this chapter. Firstly, before I begin, I would like to seek the blessings of all the assembled devotees so that I can speak properly. And also, I would like to seek the prayers from the Acharyas, and would like to begin with the Mangalacharna prayers. Om Ajnanatimmirandasya Jnananjana Salakaya Chakshurulmilitam Yena Tasmai Sri Gurave Namaha. Sri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Ramayam Tadati Padantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Padakamalam Shri Guru Vaishnavamscha Sri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunathanvitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakhanvitamscha Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Presthaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swaminiti Namine Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Pasyatya Deshatarine Vancha Kalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandho Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostate Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Rushabhanu Sudevi Pranamami Hari Priye. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Srivasadi Gaura Bhakta Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Once again, welcome to all the devotees. Today, as Prabhu mentioned, we'll be discussing verses 7 to 10 from 4th canto, 24th chapter, and the chapter is titled Chanting the song sung by Lord Shiva. We'll first read the verses, followed by some points that I have heard and read from Srila Prabhupada books and other exalted devotees. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Tatrapi Hamsam Purusham Paramatmanam Atmadrik Yejam Stallokatam Apa Kushalena Samadhina Tatrapi Hamsam Purusham Paramatmanam Atmadrik Yajam Stallokatam Apa Kushalena Samadhina Tatrapi Hamsam Purusham Paramatmanam Atmadrik Yam Stallokatam Apa Kushalena Samadhina. Word to word translation. Tatrapi, despite his engagement. Hamsam, one who kills the distress of his kinsmen. Purusham, unto the Supreme Person. Paramatmanam, the most beloved super soul. Atmadrik, one who has seen or acquired self-realization. Yajan, by worship. Tat Lokatam, achieved the same planet. Apa, achieved. Kushalena, very easily. Samadhina, always keeping himself in ecstasy. We'll just read the translation for each of these verses, and once we complete the 4 verses, we'll discuss the purport in detail. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Although Maharaja Antardhana was engaged in performing sacrifices, because he was a self-realized soul, he very intelligently rendered devotional service to the Lord, who eradicates all the fears of his devotees. By thus worshipping the Supreme Lord, Maharaj Antardhana, wrapped in ecstasy, attained his planet very easily. Text number 8. Havirdhana dhavirdhani vidurasuta satsutan barhi sadam gayam suklam krishnam satyam jitavratam. Havirdhana dhavirdhani vidurasuta satsutan barhishadam gayam shuklam krishnam satyam jitavratam. Havirdhana dhavirdhani vidurasuta satsutan barhishadam gayam shuklam krishnam satyam jitavratam. Translate word to word meaning. Havirdhana, from Havirdhana. Havirdhani, the name of the wife of Havirdhana. Vidura, O Vidura. Asuta, gave birth. Sat, 6 Sutan, sons. Barhishadam, of the name Barhishad. Gayam, of the name Gaya. Shuklam, of the name Shukla. Krishnam, of the name Krishna. Satyam, of the name Satya. Jitavrata, of the name Jitavrata. Havirdhana, the son of Maharaja Antardhana, had a wife named Havirdhani, who gave birth to 6 sons named Barhishad, Gaya, Shukla, Krishna, Satya, and Jitavrata. Text number 9. Barhishad Sumahabhago Havirdhani Prajapatihi Kriya Kandeshu Nishnato Yogeshu Chakurudvaha. Barhishad Sumahabhago Havirdhani Prajapatihi Kriya Kandeshu Nishnato Yogeshu Chakurudvaha. Barhishatsu Mahabhago Havirdhani Prajapatihi Kriya Kandeshu Nishnato Yogeshu Chakurudvaha. Barhishat, of the name Barhishat. Sumahabhagaha, very fortunate. Havirdhanihi, of the name Havirdhani. Prajapatihi, the post of Prajapati. Kriya Kandeshu, in the matter of fruitive activities. Nishnataha, being merged in. Yogeshu, in mystic yoga practices. Cha, also. Kuru Udvaha, of the best Kurus. Vidura. The great sage Maitreya continued, my dear Vidura, Havirdhana's very powerful son named Barhishat was very expert in performing various kinds of fruitive activities, and he was also expert in the practice of mystic yoga. By his great qualifications, he became known as Prajapati. The last verse for today. Yasyedam deva yajanam anuyagnam vitanvataha prachina greh kushair asid astram vasudhatalam. Yasyedam deva yajanam anuyagnam vitanvataha prachina greh kushair asid astratam vasudhatalam. Yasyedam deva yajanam anuyagnam vitanvataha prachina greh kushair asid astratam vasudhatalam. Yasya, whose idam, this deva yajanam, satisfying the demigods by sacrifices, anuyajnam, continuously sacrificing, vitanvataha, executing, prachina grahi, keeping the kusha grass facing towards the eastern side, kushai, the kusha grass, asit, remain, astratam, scattered, vasudhatalam, all over the surface of the globe. Translation: Maharaj Barshita executed many sacrifices all over the world. He scattered Usha grass and kept the tops of the grasses pointed eastward. Hare Krishna. So we'll go back to the 7th verse and read the purport given by Srila Prabhupada. So here it's mentioned, so we see here in the beginning of this chapter, Prabhu Maharaj had, it's mentioned that Prabhu Maharaj had 5 sons, and then the eldest son, who had a reputation like that of his fathers, he became the emperor and gave his younger brothers different directions to rule. So because he was very fond and just like his father, he was affectionate to everyone. He also engaged his brothers in the service of the people. So like that, he divided 4 different parts and gave 4 different parts of the world to his brothers. And then it said that first it's talked about Antardhana, who happens to be like his original name, like we see here, 3 sons of Maharaj Antardhana. Like yesterday we were reading, so Maharaj Vijitaswa, who is first eldest son of Maharaj Prutu, he was given the title Antardhana. So in this verse that we are discussing, the qualities, the devotional qualities of Maharaj Antardhana are being mentioned. So it was said in the previous verses that as part of his prescribed duties, he had to collect taxes, punish the citizens if there are any wrong deeds committed by them, and he had the supreme power at his discharge, so he has to discharge all the duties that comes with the power. But him being a pure devotee, he was not at all interested in these kind of duties. So on the excuse of performing sacrifices, so he said that he left the royal throne. He gave that kingdom to his sons, and he went to perform sacrifices. And specifically, it is mentioned that although he was performing various sacrifices, because he was a self-realized soul, he very intelligently rendered devotional service. So the purport Prabhupada is saying, since sacrifices are generally performed by fruitive actors, it is especially mentioned here, Tatrapi, that although Maharaj Antardhana was externally engaged in performing sacrifices, his real business was rendering devotional service by hearing and chanting. In other words, he was performing the usual sacrifices by the method of Sankirtana Yajna, as recommended herein. Shravanam Kirtanam Vishnu Smaranam Pada Sevanam Archanam Mandanam Dasyam Sakyam Atmanivedanam. Devotional service is called Kirtana Yajna, and by practicing the Sankirtana Yajna, one is very easily elevated to the planet where the Supreme Lord resides. Out of the 5 kinds of liberations, achieving the same planet where the Lord resides and living with the Lord there is called Salokya liberation. So we can see here that Maharaj Antardhana was a pure devotee, though he was externally performing various sacrifices mentioned in the Vedas. So he was not at all interested in the material affairs. That's what we understand. And also from Bhagavatam, we understand what is the ultimate duty that one has to perform while doing these prescribed duties. And also, while doing the prescribed duties, what can one consider that one has achieved the perfection of these prescribed duties? So Bhagavatam, very beginning, it says that Samsiddhir Haritoshanam, Atha Kumbir Vijashreshta, Varnashrama Vibhagashaha, Swantiktasya Dharmasya, Samsiddhir Haritoshanam. So Samsiddhir Haritoshanam. So whatever occupational or prescribed duties one has to perform as part of one's Varna and Ashrama, unless those are done for the satisfaction of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, those occupational duties have no real meaning, or we can also understand that the performer has not attained the highest perfection of performing those duties. So Maharaj Antardhana very well knowing the fact that unless he pleases the Supreme Personality of Godhead, his occupational duties however, no matter how much perfectly he performs those occupational duties, it's of no use. And also a specific mention is given about the word Atmadrik. So Atmadrik, here we see it's mentioned, one who has seen or acquired self-realization. So the word Atmadrik comes in many places. The root word drik is to see, to be able to see. And Atmadrik means to be able to see the self in a more philosophical way. But what we understand here is one who is situated in the transcendental consciousness. So that is transcendental consciousness automatically means one who is beyond the material consciousness and who is aloof from the conception of material life. So one of the major or the prime symptoms of material consciousness, as we understand, is having a false ego, basically identifying oneself with the body. So having attained that stage, so his consciousness is freed from false ego. So he's no longer identifying with the body. So then we can, one is considered to have the perfect consciousness. Basically, in other words, it's Krishna consciousness, which in turns we can understand that when one is in such consciousness, one sees everything in relationship with Krishna. So that was the prime reason he was unable to extract, or rather do his duties in the mood of a king, because more even from a philosophical standpoint, one is to not be able to identify oneself with the body. For a devotee, being free from false ego, sarvopadi vinirmuktam, that's what we understand, right? Like from the definition of bhakti. So Maharaj Antardhana was being freed from false ego means he was unable to digest the fact that he was the supreme ruler or he has the authority of supreme royal power. So he just considered himself as an eternal servitor of the Lord, and he could no longer accept that position. So these are the few points that we understand that highlight his exalted qualities. And further, this Atmadrik verse elsewhere, when we see in other verses or in other purports, further explanation of this Atmadrik is given as when someone has this consciousness, typically a perfect devotee, sees any movable or immovable objects are nothing but an energy of Krishna. So whenever devotee sees anything around in this world, he doesn't consider it to be separate from Krishna. And what happens? What is the consequence of that consciousness? It said that he immediately remembers the personal form of Krishna. So then, therefore, in all his observations, he sees Krishna only. Further, we understand from Brahma Samhita also. Lord Brahma says in the Brahma Samhita praise, Premanjana Churita Bhakti Lochanena. So one can actually see Krishna not by knowledge, or not by performing of sacrifices, or not by immense sadhana, but one who has anointed his eyes with the love of Krishna, one can see Krishna easily everywhere and anywhere. So in this context, our acharyas have given this understanding that chakshu means the ability to see, right? Vision. So there is charma chakshu. Charma chakshu means our material eyes. So by our material eyes, we can see like these devices in front of us, things as they are, any objects that we see around. So that's basically just giving us the vision and the understanding only from a material perspective. Like when one sees around, one sees trees, so they just sees the trees and nothing, they can't comprehend anything much more beyond that. But a little higher is Gnana Chakshu. But when someone sees a tree, like maybe a botanical expert, he thinks that, okay, this tree is of this variety, these leaves are of this nature, and this tree is in this particular stage of its life, like that. And then someone is in a Prema Chakshu, like a pure devotee who is in Vrindavan, when they see the tree, they not only understand that, okay, these trees are like, this is a Tamal tree, this is a Kadamba tree. When they see a Tamal tree, they see the form of Krishna. So that is what one understands by having the vision, Atmadrik. So Atmadrik for devotees, one who has acquired or seen or acquired self-realization, means he is seeing everything and anything in relationship with Krishna. So further, we understand here that here Prabhupada is mentioning about the point that Maharaja Antardhana was wrapped in ecstasy. So he was performing sacrifices, but on the pretext of performing sacrifices, he was doing Sankirtana Yajna. And while doing the Sankirtana Yajna, what is the result? Because it's mentioned, the specific quality of the Supreme Lord is mentioned, who is considered as one who eradicates the fears of all his devotees. Bhaktanam Abhayankaraha. So he creates fearlessness. So that's what we see, one of his Abhayahastam, like one hand, like for Lord Balaji also, we see when the hand is downstairs, pointing down, it is considered as creating fearlessness. It's like giving protection, Abhaya, giving Abhaya to the devotees of the Lord who has taken shelter at his lotus feet. So that's what Prabhupada is mentioning. What is that? The ultimate eradicating, the ultimate sign of eradicating the fear of all his devotees, to give the devotee the freedom from the repeated cycle of birth and death and a place in his eternal abode. We see in Bhagavad-Gita, Krishna says, especially in the Chaturshloki Gita, Tesham Satata Yuktanam Bhajatam Priti Purvakam Tadami Buddhi Yogantam Yenamam Upayantiti. So to those who are constantly devoted of serving me with love, so again, the key word here is not just serving, constantly serving Krishna with love, I give the understanding by which they can come to me. So in that, Prabhupada writes, in the Prabhupada writes, the person may have a bona fide spiritual master and may be attached to a spiritual organization, but he may not, if he, in spite of all of that, he may not be intelligent. So here, intelligence means they may not be able to get the right realizations or the right understandings, understand the different nuances in the way, in the Bhagavatam, Chaitanya Charitamrita, all of that. They may not be able to recollect the verses, give eloquent or spellbinding talks. But still, if they pick up some sort of service and continue to do that service with sincerity, Krishna from within gives them the instructions and the knowledge to how they can come back to him. So 2 days back, we were also hearing from Sankarshanitaya Prabhu how, like he was, in his talk, if you put together like a flow chart, it's like Krishna, we can only go back to Godhead by Krishna's mercy, and how to attract Krishna's mercy by sincerity. And Prabhuji was saying sincerity means being in 100% Krishna consciousness. And who has in that sincerity? One who has the urgency. So it's like, from, if you want to attract Krishna's mercy, you have to show the sincerity, you have to show the urgency. And Prabhuji was saying urgency means not delaying things and giving priority. And urgency is displayed by only those who are in complete knowledge. So the qualification then becomes, the qualification is that the person always engage himself in Krishna consciousness with love and devotion, and render whatever menial service that one has, or based on their capacity and capability, they should continue to render whatever service. But the key word here is to do it with sincerity, with urgency, and with love. So then the Lord ultimately protects him and protects mainly from the devotee from all kinds of fear, and gives him the ultimate shelter and ultimate protection. So another point Prabhupada is mentioning, the purport is, he's mentioning the famous verse from Prahlad Maharaj, Shravanam Kirtanam Vishnu Smaranam Pada Sevanam Archanam Vandanam Dasim Sakyam Atma Nivedanam. So here, in this context also, we see actually when this verse was spoken, Hiranyakashipu when he sends Prahlad Maharaj for his education in his school, he asks once he comes back, you have gone to school, you have been there for a good amount of time. Summarize me and tell me what is the best knowledge that you have learned there. And in response to that question, Prahlad Maharaj speaks this verse, which basically is the ultimate summary of our devotional service, the 9 processes of devotional service, right? So Shravanam, which begins with Shravanam, which is hearing and hearing the transcendental glories of the Lord, Kirtanam, chanting the glories of the Lord, Smaranam, remembering, Padasevanam, serving the lotus feet, Archanam, worshipping, Vandanam, offering obeisances, Dasyam, being a servant, Sakyam, a friend, and then finally offering all of oneself to the Lord. So it's interesting, Prabhupada also writes about this verse here, because later on we'll see about when we, in a few verses, when we talk about King Prachina Barahisha, how he was missing these points. So ultimately, one has to come to the point where it all has to be done for the ultimate satisfaction of the Lord, and that is true knowledge. So continuing further, we'll go to verse number 8. Yeah, before that, I just wanted to share one point which I read. So here it's mentioned in the point that although Maharaj Antardhana was externally engaged in performing sacrifices, his real business was rendering devotional service by hearing and chanting. So one point that I read and heard from the Chaitanya Lila is a similar message was given to Rupa and Sanatana Goswami by Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. We know Rupa and Sanatana Goswami were employed as administrators in the kingdom of Nawab Hussain Shah, and they were given very exalted positions, and they had a lot of opulences. But with what did they do with those opulences and those celestial buildings? So when they stayed in Ramakeli, they excavated, created a garden which was similar to Vrindavan. They dug up ponds which they named Radha Kund, Sham Kund, and many other Krishna's pastime places. They built in their celestial buildings, and they used to invite devotees for Harinam, Harikatha, Harikirtan. And this is how they used to spend their lives, even though they had access to such huge wealth, and they were, from a material standpoint, they were indulged in a lot of materialistic activities. But internally they were praying to the Lord. They, just like we read, they were not at all interested in doing that. They were praying to the Lord, when can they be relieved? So when they hear Mahaprabhu is coming to Ramakeli, they will be coming to Ramakeli, they start writing letters to Mahaprabhu, like, how can we get rid of, come out of these duties? So Mahaprabhu doesn't reply. So they continue to write the letters. And finally, after many attempts, one reply comes. And the reply, it's just one line, and it reads, just as a young lady who is married, if she falls in love with another man than her husband, then she will perform her duties to her husband exceptionally attentively, so that he will not in any way suspect what is in her mind. But in her mind, she will constantly absorb in meditating on her Dharma. So then the point here is, at that time, in their context, Rupa and Sanatana Goswami knew what it meant, that they had to continue doing their duties with such a perfection and such attention, but at the same time continue their internal focus on Krishna. So that is another instruction that we can understand in our day-to-day life, how we are also engaged in many duties, occupational duties, official duties, personal duties. But how can one may think that are these blockers on the path of my spiritual journey? But none, it's not like that, right? Chaitanya Mahaprabhu himself is saying, and here also from Maharaj's example, like, even though one is engaged in these duties, material duties, one can still progress on the path of bhakti. One can still continue to have that internal focus, internal consciousness completely engaged on Krishna. So that is another point that I would like to discuss. So moving further, so from verses 8 to 9, 8 doesn't have a purport, so the 9th has a purport. So here from 8 to 9, it is the Havirdhana, the son of Maharaj, so further progeny of Prithvi Maharaj here is being described. So Maharaj Antardhana had a son called Havirdhana, and Havirdhana in turn had 6 sons. The first among them happened to be Barhishat, at least in the names here. So Barhishat, so in 9 and 10, because that's the further context of this chapter, the activities and then the activities of the sons of Maharaj Barhishat are described. So 8 and 9 and 10 talk about Maharaj Barhishat, who happened to be a very expert karma kriya kandeshu nishnaho. He became very expert in the performance of various kinds of fruit sacrifices, and he was also expert in the practice of mystic yoga. So because of these great qualifications, and then naturally him being the ruler of the world, he was also appointed to be a Prajapati, whose duty is to beget children and increase the population. So coming to the verse 10, so here in this verse, it's also mentioned like how he had got the name of Prachina Barhishat. So Barhishat is his original name, and Prachina. So what happened, as he was so engrossed in doing sacrifices, like in the Prabhupada, like in the Prabhupada mentions, Maharaj Barhishat dived very deeply into the fruitive activities of sacrifice. This means that as soon as he finished one yajna in one place, he began performing another yajna in the immediate vicinity. So such was his continuous performance of the sacrifice that at one point, because for sacrifice, generally this kusha grass, which is considered to be very sacred and considered to be very purifying, an important ingredient of the purificatory process, has to be kept. So, and not only he was doing so fast, he was covering the area also such a fast that at one point the whole world was covered with this kusha grass, which was being pointed towards the east direction. So that's why he came to be known as Prachina Barhishat, because of this spectacular activity. He was also named as Prachina Barhishat. So few points that I had noted down from this activity of Prachina Barhishat, what he was doing. So he's an expert in Kriya Kandeshu. So then what are let's understand what are fruitive activities and what are the pitfalls of performing these fruitive activities. So it's mentioned that he was an expert in fruitive activities. So fruitive actors are generally in the Shastras, they're called karma kandis. So we know that yoga cycle ladder, right? First karma kandis, and then they have to move towards the karma yogas, and then the karma yogis, and then like that jnana yoga, ashtanga yoga, jnana yoga, and like that bhakti yoga in that order. So here, even in the karma kandis or karma yoga stage, the focus is mainly on the fruitive activities. The difference between the karma kandis and the karma yogis is so in the karma yogi stage, at least one person theoretically knows the goal of life, but he's still addicted to the fruits of activities. So after performing these sacrifices, sometimes these people who are engaged, they customarily offer. It becomes a customary activity to offer the results to Lord Vishnu. So that's the major difference between the karma yogis and bhakti yogis. Right? In bhakti yogi, it's not a customary activity and it's not the performance of ritual. It's the devotee first of all offers oneself, his body, mind, words to Lord Vishnu or Krishna, and then whatever the results come, it's also offered back to Krishna. So that is the major difference, and that's a major pitfall for one who follows this process of karma kanda. So in Bhagavad-Gita, Krishna uses the word Veda Vadarata. So Veda Vadarata is one who are who are followers of the Vedas, more so from a theoretical sense. they are called men of small knowledge and who are attached to the flowery words of the Vedas. So they do not consider the ultimate perfection, or they just follow the recommended fruitive activities. Why? Because the goal, even though they have a preliminary understanding of the ultimate goal, they then start to consider the elevation to heavenly planets, good birth, power, and so on and so forth to be of much more significance than the ultimate goal. So then the major thing or the major consequence of doing this is being desirous. They continue to say that, or they will eventually say that there is nothing beyond this. There is nothing more beyond this. Actually, we started with an initial understanding of an ultimate goal, but actually this is the goal and there's nothing more beyond this. So the first pitfall we can understand from performance of fruitive activities is fruitive activities can fall for material temptations and go astray from the path of devotion. So here I was hearing one example of Bhishma Dev recently, that we see that Bhishma Dev, like he was also he was the rightful heir to the Kurukshetra throne, but because his father wanted to marry Satyavati, and due to that promise he has given to Satyavati's father, he took the vow of not being celibate, so that there won't be any progeny from his side, and then there can't be any claim to the kingdom. So that is a vow he took. But when later on, due to the circumstances of providence, it so happened that his brothers passed away, and then there was no apparent heir to the throne. So the same person, Satyavati, for whom Bhishma Dev took that vow, she comes and approaches and asks him, "You can now go and marry and have a progeny, so that we could continue to have a care for this throne." But so the temptation, normally for any person, the temptation would be there, because and it is not adharmic also, right? It's not for sense gratification; it's for a purpose. But Bhishma Dev never fell for that temptation. He continued to remain steadfast to his vow. And likewise, we see later on, even in the case of when he was getting his brothers married, like Ambalika and Amba, those three ladies, Amba, Ambika, and Ambalika. So when Amba, she was refused by her lover, and she comes back and says, "No, you have to marry me." Still, at that time, he was ready to face the anger of Amba rather than let go of his vow. So the point there is, we can understand that even we also take vows as devotees, as initiated devotees, we take vows, and apart from our initiation vows, there are many other vows. So that on the path of performing or staying true to those vows, we encounter many temptations. So at that time, the only shelter, like Bhishma Dev was so steadfast. One, he was yes, he had that determination, but at the same time, it is also said, him being a pure devotee of the Lord, he was getting his determination to avoid those temptations from the Supreme Lord, who is the shelter of all the devotees and who removes the fears. So likewise, even when we, in our performance of our vows, there can be many temptations and many circumstances where we may be presented with situations where we may potentially break the vows, but with when we take complete shelter of the Lord and intensely play to our spiritual masters and Vaishnavas, we can easily overcome those temptations. So moving further, another pitfall of we can see another pitfall of the performance of fruitive activities is fruitive actors rather are never completely satisfied. Why? How do we understand this? So we see that in Bhagavad-Gita it is said, "Adyantavantaha kaunteya nateshu ramate buddha." So it is said that the sense gratification to fruitive activities ultimately are done for sense gratification. So they always end up miseries, because they are temporary, they have a start and an end, and they end up the performer in a miserable condition. So Prabhupada says the proof of this is Arjuna's arguments in Bhagavad-Gita itself. So Arjuna says when in his arguments that I can find no means to drive away this grief, because he was giving various arguments to not fight, but still those arguments he was not able to convince himself. So he's saying I can find no means to drive away this grief which he was in, and he is confidently saying that he will not able to dispel or drive away this grief, even if I win a prosperous, unrivaled kingdom on earth with sovereignty like the demigods in heaven. So he's saying whatever amount of wealth I can acquire, I'll still not be able to completely satisfy, and I will not be able to drive away my grief. So what we understand, Prabhupada gives in that purport that so no amount of material opulence can solve the problems of life and uproot the root cause of the misery that the individual soul is facing. So we see that if economic development and material comforts would drive away one's lamentation and efforts, then Arjuna would not have said that. Like, if I get this, I'll be able to forget about this, because in some way or the other, no matter whatever material comforts one has, there will be situations wherein one will be pulled down from the peak of happiness to the lowest position. So, and few weeks, I would say, early also, we were reading from Srila Prabhupada Leela, where Prabhupada had plans to meet Indira Gandhi, and he had written down the points where what he would talk. Of course, the first being the ability to have his grant visas for his disciples, but the top among the list was no other religious or religions other than the religion of Bhagavad-Gita, because ultimately one follows the religion of Bhagavad-Gita, which is basically surrendering to Lord Krishna and following his instructions. One cannot find ways and means to drive away the ultimate grief and ultimate miseries of life. So the second pitfall that we can consider of performing fruitive actions is one can never be completely satisfied, and ultimately one has to seek for that satisfaction. So Srimad Bhagavatam especially talks about this. Yayatma suprasidati, savai pumsham paro dharma. So what is the dharma? So here is what the dharma, Prabhupada also says the dharma as can be translated in many ways. One is religion, and one is rightful duties. So savai pumsham paro dharma. What is the biggest religion? Yayatma ahaituke apratihata, performing devotional service in ahaituke and apratihata way to the Supreme Lord, and that alone can satisfy a soul. So that's what we see. But fruitive activities can never satisfy a particular living entity. The third pitfall that we can consider for while performing fruitive activities is the fruitive actors neither realize the ultimate objective nor achieve the highest perfection. Because of the first two pitfalls that we also discussed, and this pitfall, what happens when one is completely engaged in fruitive actions? They develop the cheating tendency, that is cheating oneself and cheating others. So how is it that cheating oneself? Because one is searching after wealth. After this wealth, one attains a particular wealth, then he would be again searching for another type of wealth. So we also see in this context that in material world also, when in today's world as well, when we seek some financial advice, the advice generally given in terms of investments is when you put in something in investment, it should grow, multiple, it should not come down. And generally, if you see a frugal person, they will consider, like, for example, a four-wheeler or a car like a dead investment, because we see also when we go for renewing the car insurance, the insured declared value, one item which is available and is used as a basis for calculating the insurance premium, the insured declared value decreases as the age of the car goes. So generally people are ready to agree that investing in a car is a dead investment, but they fail to realize that investing in body, which is basically increasing the wealth, is the biggest dead investment, because the more we invest, nothing is going to come out. The investment is always going to be red, no matter whatever circumstances are. So that is how one cheats oneself. And then also this cheating tendency can also manifest in cheating the God. So there is one funny story wherein one person who wants to try his luck in lottery, purchase a lottery ticket, and then says to prays to God rather, that if I win this lottery, I'll give 50% to you. But eventually, when he wins only 50% of that lottery amount, he decides not to give that 50% to the Lord or to the God, and considering that the God has already taken his share of 50%. So that's how the performer of a fruitive activity develops cheating tendency. And Bhagavatam names this cheating tendency as dharma projita kaitava dharma, because this kaitava dharma, the manifestation of the kaitava dharma is dharma artha kama moksha. And one ultimately, the ultimate cheating one does to oneself is desiring liberation, which is basically almost like a spiritual suicide. So to drive away this cheating religion, Bhagavatam in the beginning itself tells that this book Bhagavatam establishes the highest truth, which is basically devotional service to Lord. And also in Chaitanya Charitamrita, and because in the purport, we didn't get a chance to read the complete purport, but the essence of the purport is here Prabhupada is mentioning that Maharaj Barhishat was so expert in performing sacrifices, he was doing sacrifices one after the other. But Prabhupada is highlighting that in this present age, we could also take, so positively we can take one inspiration from Maharaj Barhishat, Prachina Barhishat, is to continuously perform Sankirtan Yajna. And Prabhupada is contrasting the ease with one can do Sankirtan Yajna as compared to any of these other yajnas, which are costly to do. We don't have the right paraphernalia, right people to do. So in Chaitanya Charitamrita also, in regards to this driving away the cheating religion, and then Sankirtan Yajna, it is said that the sun and the moon compared to dissipate the darkness of the external world. So likewise, the two brothers have descended to dissipate the darkness of the inner core of the heart. So then it is mentioned that the absolute truth Sri Krishna, who is Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, is distributing this pure love of God through the congregational chanting of the holy name. So for this, I would like to conclude what we have discussed today in brief. So we discussed about the glories of Maharaj Antardhana, who is a pure devotee, who was completely engaged himself in devotional service, though outwardly he was performing sacrifices. And as a result of those devotional activities, he was able to easily attain the Lord's lotus feet. Then we read about the introduction to Maharaj Barhishat and his activities very briefly. And then we also understood from his quality of being Kriya Kandeshu Nitshnataha, who is an expert in performing fruitive activities. We understood what are the pitfalls, what is a fruitive activity, what is it actually meant for, but what are the pitfalls in performing the fruitive activities. And later on, we also see that Maharaj Prachina Barhishat himself, when he's on this continuous activity of performing sacrifices, Narada Muni takes, who is the ultimate Vaishnava, he takes pity on Maharaj Barhishat and he enlightens him, and that's how the Guru comes and helps us. We have read many times. So he enlightens and he tells him that what you are doing, the fruitive activities, are actually fruitless and they're futile attempts, and he enlightens him through the story of Puranjana, which are basically the following chapters, the content of the following chapters to come. So with that, I would like to conclude, and if there are any questions and comments, please ask. Whatever capacity I can understand, I'll answer the questions. And if there are any connections, please do so. I'll be more than happy to learn from the mistakes. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna Prabhuji, thanks a lot for the wonderful class. It was really nice. And at the end, you summarized nicely also. So devotees lines are unmuted. Devotees can unmute and ask any questions. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna Prabhu Dhanarjanams.
Hare Krishna.
Thank you for the very nice, wonderful class. I like that thing which you talked about is anything which we invest in the material world is a dead investment. It's very hard to realize, but yes, it's a very, very, very important thing which we should remember. Thank you so much.
Hare Krishna Prabhu, Dandavat Pranams. Thanks for the nice class. Prabhu, can you please tell about this Kaitava Dharma?
Yeah, so Bhagavatam says this Kaitava Dharma is cheating religion because the Dharma, what is Dharma? The ultimate objective of Dharma is to ultimately achieve the pure devotional, loving devotional service to the Lord. But generally Dharma means people understand as performance of prescribed duties, and by the performance of prescribed duties, because they are following the Vedic injunctions, Vedic regulations, they will be getting some results in return. The results could be in terms of high birth or wealth or education or place in the heavenly planet. So dharma, artha, and by doing this, one engages in sense gratification. And ultimately, one may consider saying, okay, when one is frustrated because one who doesn't get what he aspires or desires for, then one may consider liberation, which is also another way of cheating, because one is not realizing one's full potential as a living entity. So here, liberation means trying to merge oneself and trying to, one sense, escape away from performing devotional service. So these four activities, like doing prescribed duties, expecting something in return, and then trying to enjoy these results, the material opulences, and then in turn getting liberation, aspiring for liberation, are considered cheating religion. And that's what Bhagavatam drives away. It mentions in the very beginning itself, almost like in the second verse, where if someone is looking for this kind of content, Bhagavatam is not for them. So Bhagavatam is downplays or outrightly rejects these four aspects and establishes that pure devotional service without expecting, doing service to the Lord without expecting anything in return is the highest dharma. So that is what I understand.
Thank you very much, Prabhu. So this Dharma, Artha, Kama, Moksha is Kaitava Dharma.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Right.
Krishna Prabhu, Gaurchandra Gopinath Prabhu mentioned that thank you for the wonderful class. Two important takeaway for me is, first, Bhishma Dev example of how one steadfast initiation was. Second one is investment in body is dead investment. Hare Krishna, do you have any other questions, comments?
I think we can conclude, Prabhu.
Yes, Prabhuji, there are no more questions. We can conclude with the Vaishnava Pranama.
Thank you for everyone's time. Vancha kalpatarubhyascha kripa sindhubhya evacha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namah. Ananta koti Vaishnava Bhakta Vrinda ki